The letter arrived on a particularly warm spring day in 1878, its edges crumpled from the long journey to Yerington, Nevada. Clarence Davidson unfolded it with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the words that would forever change the course of his life. The farmhouse he'd inherited from his late father seemed emptier than ever as he read the confirmation that his mail-order bride would be arriving on the afternoon train in 3 weeks' time. Clarence wasn't what most folks would call handsome. At 32, his face was weathered from years of working the land, and his once athletic build had grown somewhat stocky. But he had a good heart, a thriving farm, and a desperate loneliness that had driven him to place an advertisement in a Boston newspaper seeking a bride willing to make a new start in the West. The woman who had responded, Clara Daniels, had written with such warmth and intelligence that Clarence had found himself eagerly anticipating each of her letters. She was 25, she had told him, a seamstress who had lost her parents to influenza and found herself with few prospects in the city. She had never mentioned her appearance beyond saying she had brown hair and blue eyes, but Clarence had already constructed an image of her in his mind, sweet-faced and gentle. As the day of Clara's arrival drew closer, Clarence threw himself into preparations. He whitewashed the farmhouse, inside and out, built new furniture, and even purchased new linens for the bedroom that would become hers, until they were properly married by the traveling preacher who came through Yerington once a month. On the appointed day, Clarence donned his best suit, polished his boots until they shone, and drove his wagon into town, his heart pounding with anticipation. The train from the east was scheduled to arrive at 3 o'clock, and he found himself at the station a full hour early, pacing nervously on the wooden platform. "Settle down, Davidson," called Samuel Miller, the station master. "You'll wear a hole in my floor before that train even whistles." Clarence managed a tight smile. "Can't help it, Sam. Never thought I'd be meeting my bride-to-be today." "Mail order, ain't she?" Samuel squinted at him. "Brave man taking such a gamble, her letters." Clarence paused. "There's something about her words that feels right." The station master shook his head, but his expression was kind. "Well, I hope she turns out to be everything you're hoping for." The sound of the approaching train finally broke through the afternoon quiet, its whistle piercing the air. Clarence straightened his jacket and smoothed back his sandy hair. His mouth had gone dry, and he wished he'd thought to bring a canteen of water. The train slowed to a stop with a great hiss of steam, and passengers began to disembark. Clarence scanned the faces anxiously, looking for a woman who might be searching for him. When the platform had nearly emptied and still no one had approached him, he felt a stab of fear. Had she changed her mind? Had her train been delayed? Then he noticed her, a slender figure standing alone at the far end of the platform, clutching a small valise and looking around uncertainly. She wore a simple blue traveling dress and a bonnet that shadowed her face. Clarence approached slowly, his heart in his throat. "Miss Daniels," he called. "Clara Daniels." She turned toward him, and Clarence felt his breath catch. She was indeed lovely, with delicate features and wide blue eyes, but what drew his attention immediately was the network of scars that covered the left side of her face, disappearing beneath her bonnet and the high collar of her dress. "Mr. Davidson." Her voice was soft, with a slight quaver. "I'm Clara." Clarence swallowed hard, then stepped forward and extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Daniels. I hope your journey wasn't too tiresome." She hesitated before taking his hand. It was long but not unbearable. Her eyes searched his face, clearly looking for his reaction to her appearance. Clarence knew he should say something, acknowledge what they both knew he had seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he gestured toward his wagon. I have transportation ready. It's about a half-hour ride to the farm. The journey passed in awkward silence, broken only by Clarence's occasional comments about landmarks they passed. Clara sat stiffly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, responding to his remarks with polite monosyllables. By the time they reached the farmhouse, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. Clarence helped Clara down from the wagon, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "It's not much," he said as he led her toward the house, "but it's solid and there's room to grow." Clara looked around, taking in the freshly painted clapboards, the neat garden plot, the barn and corrals beyond. "It looks like a fine home, Mr. Davidson." Inside, Clarence showed her to the bedroom he had prepared, then retreated to allow her to freshen up. He busied himself with preparing a simple supper, his mind racing. The woman in his kitchen was not the unblemished bride he had imagined, and he felt ashamed of his own disappointment. Her letters had revealed a kind and thoughtful soul. Shouldn't that matter more than whatever accident or illness had marked her? When Clara emerged, she had removed her bonnet and jacket. Her brown hair was neatly coiled at the nape of her neck, and in the warm lamplight, Clarence could see that the scars continued down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her dress. They were old burns, he realized, long healed but permanently etched into her skin. They ate in relative silence, both clearly struggling to find conversation. Finally, as Clarence cleared the plates, Clara spoke up. "Mr. Davidson, I understand if you wish to reconsider our arrangement." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I should have been more forthcoming in my letters. I didn't deliberately mislead you, but I was afraid that if I mentioned my condition, you wouldn't have responded." Clarence set the dishes down and turned to face her. "Miss Daniels, please," she interrupted. "Let me finish. I was caught in a house fire when I was 17. My mother died trying to save me, and I was left with these reminders." She gestured toward her scars. "I've had 8 years to become accustomed to the stares and the whispers, but I understand that this isn't what you expected. If you wish to purchase my return ticket, I will depart on tomorrow's train with no ill feelings toward you." Clarence sat back down across from her, struggling to find the right words. "I won't pretend I wasn't surprised," he said finally. "And I won't insult you by claiming your appearance makes no difference. We both know that would be a lie. But I need time to consider. Your letters revealed a woman of intelligence and warmth, and I'd be a fool to dismiss that because of circumstances beyond your control." Relief flickered briefly across Clara's face, followed by caution. "How much time do you need?" "The preacher won't be through Yarrington for another 3 weeks, Clarence replied. "Perhaps we could use that time to become better acquainted in person. If at the end of that period either of us feels this isn't right, we'll part ways amicably." Clara nodded slowly. "That seems fair. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Davidson." "Clarence," he corrected gently. "If we're to give this a genuine chance, I think we should at least use each other's given names." "Clarence," she repeated, offering him the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, lighting her blue eyes, and for a moment he couldn't look away. "I think I'll turn in now if you don't mind," Clara said, rising from the table. "It's been a long day, of course. Sleep well, Clara." After she had retired to her room, Clarence sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He wasn't proud of his reaction to Clara's scars, but he couldn't deny it either. What kind of future could they have together if he couldn't look at her without seeing her disfigurement first? The next morning, Clarence rose early as was his habit and found Clara already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She had tied a light scarf around her neck in a way that partially concealed the scars on her lower face. "Good morning," she said, offering him a tentative smile. "I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of cooking. I wanted to make myself useful." "Not at all," Clarence replied, taking a seat at the table. "It smells wonderful." As they ate, Clarence outlined his plans for the day. "I need to check the irrigation on the south field, and then there's fencing to be repaired. You're welcome to accompany me if you'd like to see more of the farm." Clara hesitated. "I'd like that, but perhaps first I could help around the house. I noticed your mending pile looks rather substantial." Clarence felt a flush of embarrassment. "I'm afraid I'm not much with a needle and thread. Buttons are about the extent of my sewing skills." "Then it's fortunate that I am," Clara said with a small laugh. "I wasn't exaggerating in my letters when I mentioned my abilities as a seamstress." After breakfast, Clarence headed out to the fields, his thoughts still in turmoil. When he returned for the midday meal, he found Clara on the porch, a basket of his mended clothes beside her. She had removed the scarf, and in the bright sunlight her scars seemed more pronounced. "These should last you quite a bit longer now," she said, gesturing to the basket. "I reinforced some of the seams that were beginning to weaken." "Thank you," Clarence said, genuinely impressed. "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to," Clara replied simply. "I've prepared some lunch if you're hungry." Over the next few days, they settled into a cautious routine. Clara took over the household tasks with quiet efficiency, while Clarence attended to the farm work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch if the weather allowed, or by the fire when it didn't, slowly learning more about each other beyond what had been shared in their letters. Clarence discovered that Clara had a surprising knowledge of literature and could quote lengthy passages of Shakespeare from memory. She learned that he had a talent for wood carving and had made most of the furniture in the house himself. Small confidences were exchanged, bridges cautiously built between them. But always, there remained a certain distance. Clarence could not help but notice how Clara would turn her scarred side away from him when they spoke, or how she would tense if he moved too suddenly in her direction. And he knew, with a sense of shame that grew each day, that his own gaze still slid away from her injuries too quickly. A week after Clara's arrival, they were invited to Sunday dinner at the home of John and Martha Harris, Clarence's closest neighbors. Clarence hesitated before extending the invitation to Clara, knowing how difficult it would be for her to face the scrutiny of strangers. "You don't have to come," he assured her. "The Harrises would understand if you preferred to stay here." Clara's expression tightened, but she lifted her chin resolutely. "I would rather accompany you if that's acceptable. I can't hide away forever, and if we are to consider a future together, your neighbors will eventually have to meet me." On Sunday, they drove to the Harris farm in silence, Clara wearing her best dress, and the scarf arranged carefully to provide what concealment it could without appearing too obvious in its purpose. Clarence could feel her tension as they approached the farmhouse, where several other wagons were already gathered. Martha Harris met them at the door, her welcoming smile faltering only slightly as she took in Clara's appearance. "Mr. Davidson, so good to see you. And this must be Miss Daniels." "Welcome to our home, my dear." Clara thanked her graciously, and Clarence felt a surge of gratitude toward Martha for her tact. But as they moved into the parlor where the other guests were gathered, the reactions were less discreet. Conversations faltered, eyes widened, and though politeness prevented any direct comments, the whispers began almost immediately. Throughout the meal, Clarence watched as Clara maintained her composure, answering questions about her journey west and her first impressions of Nevada with a quiet dignity. But he could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. When the women withdrew to the parlor after dinner, leaving the men to their cigars, Clarence found himself the target of direct questioning. "Didn't expect your bride to be so marked up," commented Frank Wilson, a cattle rancher from the next valley over. "Must have been a shock when she stepped off that train." Clarence stiffened. "Miss Daniels is a woman of exceptional character and skill. I consider myself fortunate that she agreed to come west." "Sure, sure," Frank said, though his expression remained skeptical. "But a man wants something pretty to look at across the breakfast table, doesn't he?" No shame in admitting it might take some getting used to. Before Clarence could respond, John Harris intervened. "Wilson, I believe you were about to tell us about that new breeding stock you acquired. I'm curious to hear how they're adapting to our climate." Clarence shot John a grateful look as the conversation turned to safer topics. When it was time to leave, he could see the relief in Clara's eyes as they made their farewells. The ride home was silent until they were nearly at the farm. Then Clara spoke, her voice quiet in the darkness. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you today." Clarence pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her. "You have nothing to apologize for. It's Wilson who should be ashamed, not you." "But I saw your face when I first stepped off the train," Clara said, her voice steady despite the pain evident in it. "You were shocked, disappointed. You had expected someone else." Clarence couldn't deny it. "Yes," he admitted, "I was surprised. But in the time you've been here, I've come to see that there's far more to you than I could have imagined from your letters alone." "But my scars still disturb you," she pressed, and it wasn't a question. Clarence looked away. "I'm trying," he said finally. "I wish I could tell you that they don't matter to me at all, but that wouldn't be the truth." "I appreciate your honesty," Clara replied, her voice softer now. "And I understand. You're not the first to find them difficult to accept." The next morning, Clarence rode into town to purchase supplies and found himself the center of attention at the general store. Word of his scarred mail-order bride had spread quickly, and the townsfolk were not subtle in their curiosity. "Heard your Eastern lady is a bit of a fright to look at," said Oscar Jenkins, the blacksmith, as Clarence was selecting new work gloves. "That's tough luck, Davidson. You planning to send her back?" Clarence felt a surge of anger. "Miss Daniels is a fine woman, Jenkins. I'd thank you to speak of her with respect." "No offense meant," Oscar replied, raising his hands defensively. "Just making conversation." As Clarence gathered his purchases, he overheard Alina Whitaker, the postmaster's wife, speaking to another woman near the fabric counter. "Poor Mr. Davidson," she was saying in a hushed voice. "To think he paid good money for her passage, only to be saddled with damaged goods. I heard the entire left side of her body is horribly disfigured." Something snapped inside Clarence. He approached the women, his purchases forgotten. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, his voice deliberately controlled. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I want to be very clear about something. Miss Daniels is not damaged goods. She is a courageous woman who survived a terrible tragedy and has built a life of dignity despite it. I would appreciate it if you would extend her the courtesy she deserves." Alina had the grace to look ashamed. "I meant no harm, Mr. Davidson. It's just that it's so unusual." "Perhaps in Yarrington," Clarence replied. "But I assure you, character is far less uncommon than kindness seems to be." He completed his purchases in silence, aware that his outburst would only add fuel to the town gossip, but unable to regret his words. As he loaded his supplies into the wagon, Samuel Miller approached him. "That was well said back there, Davidson," the station master commented. "Most folks around here mean no harm, but they can be thoughtless." Clarence nodded grimly. "I'm finding that out. Give them time," Samuel advised. "New things are always fodder for gossip, but it dies down eventually. And for what it's worth, I thought your Miss Daniels carried herself with real dignity when she arrived. Takes courage to travel across the country to marry a stranger, especially when you're different. She has courage in abundance, Clarence agreed, suddenly eager to return to the farm. When he arrived home, he found Clara in the garden, harvesting early vegetables. She had tied a wide-brimmed hat to shade her face from the sun, but she had abandoned the scarf, and her scars were plainly visible in the bright daylight. "The tomatoes are coming along nicely," she called as he approached. "We should have ripe ones within a week or two." Clarence began, then stopped, uncertain how to proceed. "I was thinking, the town's holding its Founders' Day celebration this Saturday. There'll be a picnic and dancing in the evening. I wondered if you might like to attend." Clara's hands stilled on the plants. "Are you certain that's wise, after yesterday at the Harrises?" "I'm certain that I'd like to take you if you're willing to go," Clarence replied firmly. A smile flickered across Clara's face. "Then I'd be happy to accompany you." Saturday arrived clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage from the surrounding hills. Clara had spent the previous day preparing a basket of food for the picnic: fried chicken, biscuits, and an apple pie that filled the house with its sweet aroma as it cooled. As they dressed for the occasion, Clarence noticed that Clara had fashioned herself a new dress from fabric he'd purchased in town. It was a pretty calico print in shades of blue that complemented her eyes, and she designed it with a higher collar than was strictly fashionable. "You look lovely," he said sincerely as she emerged from her room, and was rewarded with a blush that colored even the scarred side of her face. "Thank you," she replied softly. "You're quite handsome yourself." The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Bunting decorated the buildings. Tables had been set up under shade trees, and a platform had been erected for the evening's music and dancing. As they arrived, Clarence was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them, but he kept his head high, and Clara's hand firmly tucked into the crook of his arm. They found a spot to spread their blanket under an old cottonwood, and soon were joined by the Harrises and their children. Martha made a point of engaging Clara in conversation, asking for her pie recipe and commenting on the fine stitching of her dress. "I understand you were a seamstress back east," Martha said. "We could certainly use someone with your skills in Yerington. Mrs. Gonzalez does what she can, but she's getting on in years and her eyesight isn't what it was." Clara looked startled at the suggestion. "I hadn't considered. That is, I'm not sure how long I'll be staying." Clarence felt a pang at her words, a reminder that their arrangement was still very much provisional. The 3 weeks they had agreed upon were nearly up, and neither of them had mentioned the future. As the afternoon progressed, more people stopped by their blanket. Some were clearly just curious to get a closer look at Clara, but others, taking their cue from the Harrises, made genuine efforts to be welcoming. Clara handled each interaction with grace, though Clarence could see the tension in her shoulders never fully eased. When the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the square, the band struck up a lively tune. Couples moved to the dance area and Clarence turned to Clara. "Would you care to dance?" he asked. Clara hesitated, glancing around at the gathered townsfolk. "Are you sure?" "Everyone will be watching." "Let them watch," Clarence replied, offering his hand. "I'm proud to be escorting the finest lady at the celebration." Clara placed her hand in his, and he led her to the edge of the dancing area. As they joined the other couples, Clarence could feel eyes upon them, but for the first time, he found he didn't care. Clara moved gracefully, following his lead as if they had danced together 100 times before. In the warm glow of the lanterns, with music filling the air around them, Clarence really looked at her and realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her scars first. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. Noticing his intent gaze, Clarence smiled. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man here tonight." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with something that might have been hope. "Clarence," before she could continue, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. Frank Wilson's voice rose above the music, slurred with whiskey. "Davidson, brought your marked-up bride to show off, did you? Mighty charitable of you." He staggered toward them, ignoring his wife's attempts to restrain him. "Tell me, does the damage go all the way down? That's what everyone's wondering." Clarence felt Clara stiffen in his arms. He released her gently and stepped forward, placing himself between her and Wilson. "You're drunk, Frank. Go home before you say something you'll regret when you're sober." "Too late for that," John Harris muttered, appearing at Clarence's side. "Frank, your wife's waiting with your wagon." "Time to call it a night," Wilson sneered. "Just asking what everyone's thinking. No need to get all high and mighty about it." "That's enough." Clarence's voice cut through the now silent gathering. "Miss Daniels deserves your respect, not your crude speculation. She survived something that would have broken lesser souls, and her scars are a testament to her courage, not a subject for your entertainment." The sheriff stepped forward, laying a firm hand on Wilson's shoulder. "Frank, I think you'd better leave now. Don't make me insist." As Wilson was led away, muttering, Clarence turned back to Clara. She stood exactly where he had left her, her face pale but her eyes steady. He offered his arm. "I think perhaps we should go home." Clara nodded, and they made their farewells to the Harrises and the others who had shown them kindness. As they walked toward their wagon, Martha Harris called after them. "Miss Daniels, don't forget what I said about the seamstress position. Yarrington could use someone with your talents." Clara looked back, surprised. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I'll keep that in mind." The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than they had shared before, not strained but thoughtful. When they reached the farm, Clarence helped Clara down from the wagon and walked her to the door, but instead of going inside, she paused on the porch. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked softly. "About my scars being a testament to courage." Clarence looked at her in the silvery moonlight. "Yes," he said simply. "They show you're a survivor, Clara. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No one has ever defended me that way before. No one has ever seen past this." She gestured to her face. "I see you," Clarence said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just your scars, not just your face, I see you, and I think I've been falling in love with you since your first letter arrived." A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. "I've been so afraid to hope, the way you looked at me when I first arrived." "I was a fool," Clarence admitted. "Blinded by my own shallow expectations." He reached out tentatively, his fingers hovering near her scarred cheek. "May I?" Clara nodded, her eyes never leaving his face as he gently traced the ridged tissue that ran from her temple to her jaw. Her skin felt different there, smoother in some places, puckered in others, but it was warm and alive beneath his touch. "Beautiful," he murmured and meant it. Clara gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "Now I know you're either lying or mad." "Neither," Clarence insisted. "I see a beautiful woman who has endured more than most could bear, who carries her pain with dignity, who fills my house with warmth and my days with purpose." He drew a deep breath. "The preacher comes through town next Sunday. I still want to marry you, Clara Daniels, if you'll have me." Clara's hand came up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "Are you certain? Once done, it can't be undone. I will always look this way." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Clarence replied. "I love you, scars, strength, spirit, all of you." "Then yes," Clara whispered, her face illuminated with joy. "Yes, I will marry you, Clarence Davidson." He bent his head and kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara laughed a free, unself-conscious sound that Clarence realized he had never heard from her before. "What?" he asked, smiling down at her. "I was just thinking," she replied, "that perhaps I should write to that newspaper and tell them their mail-order bride service works remarkably well." The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Word of their impending marriage spread through Yarrington, and to Clarence's surprise, many of the townspeople stopped by with small gifts or offers of help. Martha Harris arrived with a beautiful handmade quilt. Eleanor Whittaker brought a basket of preserves and a heartfelt apology that Clara graciously accepted. And even Samuel Miller came out to the farm with a set of fine teacups that had belonged to his late wife. "Thought you folks might like these," he said gruffly. "No use to me, gathering dust on a shelf." Clara was touched by these gestures, but confessed to Clarence that she was nervous about the wedding itself. "Everyone will be staring," she said as they sat on the porch swing the evening before the ceremony. "I know it's silly after all this time, but I still hate being the center of attention." Clarence squeezed her hand. "Would you prefer a private ceremony, just us and the preacher? We don't have to make a public event of it if you'd rather not." Clara considered this, then shook her head. "No, if we're to make our life here, I need to stop hiding. Besides," she added with a smile, "I think I'd like to see you in your Sunday best, pledging yourself to me in front of God and everyone." The following morning dawned bright and clear. Clara had altered one of her dresses for the occasion, adding lace at the cuffs and collar, and fashioning a small matching hat that she wore at an angle that partially shadowed her scars without attempting to hide them completely. When she emerged from her room, Clarence felt his heart swell with pride and love. "You are the most beautiful bride I could have imagined," he told her, pressing a small bouquet of wildflowers into her hands. The church was packed when they arrived, and a murmur ran through the congregation as Clara walked down the aisle on John Harris's arm. But this time, the whispers seemed more appreciative than judgmental, and several women dabbed at their eyes as Clara and Clarence exchanged their vows. "I promise to cherish you all the days of my life," Clarence said, his voice steady and sure. "To see you always as I see you now, brave, beautiful, and beloved." Clara's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, but her eyes never left Clarence's face. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Clarence kissed her without hesitation, unconcerned about who might be watching. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with tables set up in the churchyard and food provided by the women of the congregation. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers, including several who inquired discreetly about the possibility of commissioning dresses or mending work. "You might actually have a business on your hands," Clarence commented as they drove home that evening, now truly husband and wife. "If you want it, that is." Clara leaned against his shoulder, contentment evident in every line of her body. "I think I might," she said thoughtfully. "It would be good to contribute something beyond our home. Though that will always be my first priority," she added, glancing up at him with a smile that held promises for their future together. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Clarence discovered that Clara's scars extended down her left shoulder and arm to her hip, legacy of the fire that had nearly claimed her life. He kissed each marked inch with reverence, learning the map of her survival with lips and fingertips, until Clara wept with the pure joy of being fully seen, fully accepted for the first time in her adult life. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Clara confessed her deepest fear. "I worried that once you saw all of me, you might regret your choice." Clarence pulled her closer against his chest. "The only thing I regret is that you suffered so much pain, But I could never regret loving you, Clara Davidson. Not in this lifetime or any other. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Davidson farm. Clara's seamstress business flourished, with women coming from as far as Carson City to commission her work. Clarence expanded the farm, adding more acreage and diversifying their crops with Clara's careful financial management. Their first child, a son they named Matthew, was born just over a year after their wedding. He had Clarence's sandy hair and Clara's blue eyes, and from his earliest days showed a fascination with his mother's unusual face, often reaching up to pat her scarred cheek with perfect acceptance. "Children see with clearer eyes than adults," Clara observed as she nursed their son. "They haven't learned to judge yet." When Matthew was 3, the Davidsons welcomed twin daughters, Sarah and Emily, who kept the household in cheerful chaos with their identical faces but distinctly different personalities. As the children grew, Clara and Clarence made a point of teaching them about compassion and the many forms that strength could take. "Your mama is the strongest person I know," Clarence would tell them, watching Clara's face glow with happiness at his words. "She taught me that what we survive becomes part of who we are, but doesn't have to define us." Not everything was easy. There were still occasional cruel remarks from strangers passing through town, moments when new acquaintances would stare too long or look away too quickly. But within Yarrington itself, Clara gradually ceased to be the scarred mail-order bride and became simply Mrs. Davidson, the talented seamstress with the quick wit and generous heart. 5 years after their wedding, Frank Wilson's barn caught fire during a summer thunderstorm. Despite their history, Clarence joined the other men of the community in fighting the blaze, working through the night to save what they could of the structure and the panicked livestock within. When he returned home, exhausted and smoke-stained, Clara was waiting for him on the porch. "You could have been hurt," she said, her voice tight with the fear she had controlled throughout the long night of waiting. "You could have been burned." Clarence took her hands in his. "But I wasn't, and even if I had been." He touched her scarred cheek gently. "You of all people know that burns heal. What matters is that we help someone in need." Clara's expression softened. "You're right, of course, and I'm proud of you. I just can't bear the thought of you suffering as I did." The next day, Clara did something that surprised the entire town. She baked a pie her specialty, apple with cinnamon and a touch of nutmeg, and took it to the Wilson farm, where Frank and his family were assessing the damage in the harsh light of day. Frank looked up in surprise as Clara approached, her scars plain in the sunlight, the pie held before her like a peace offering. "Mrs. Davidson," he said awkwardly, removing his hat, "this is unexpected." "I understand what it is to lose things to fire, Mr. Wilson," Clara said simply. "And I believe in returning evil with good. I hope this small comfort finds you and your family well." Frank Wilson had the good grace to look ashamed. "I've never properly apologized for my behavior at that Founders' Day celebration. I was drunk, but that's no excuse." "What I said was cruel and untrue." Clara nodded, accepting his words. "We all have our moments of weakness, Mr. Wilson. What matters is how we choose to go forward from them." From that day on, Frank Wilson became one of Clara's most vocal defenders in Yarrington. If a newcomer stared too long or made an insensitive remark, they were likely to find Wilson at their elbow, informing them quietly but firmly that Mrs. Davidson was a lady deserving of their respect. "Never thought I'd see the day," Clarence commented after hearing about one such incident. "Frank Wilson, reformed town bully," Clara smiled. "People can surprise you. I think we've both learned that." As their 10th anniversary approached, Clarence began working secretly in his workshop, emerging with sawdust in his hair and refusing to tell Clara what he was creating. On the morning of their anniversary, he blindfolded her and led her outside to the shade of the old oak tree that stood in their yard. "Ready?" he asked, positioning her carefully before removing the blindfold. Clara blinked in the summer sunlight, then gasped. Before her stood a gazebo, meticulously crafted of polished wood with delicate latticework and a small bench inside. Rose vines had been planted at each corner, already beginning to climb the supports. "It's beautiful," she breathed, turning to embrace him. "But what on earth prompted this?" Clarence kissed her softly. 10 years ago, I promised to love and cherish you all the days of my life. I thought we should have a special place to mark each anniversary from now on, a place that's just ours." That evening, as they sat together in their gazebo watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, their children playing nearby, Clara rested her head on Clarence's shoulder. "When I stepped off that train in Yarrington," she said quietly, "I was so afraid. I thought the best I could hope for was that you wouldn't send me back immediately, that you might tolerate me out of duty or pity. I never dreamed that we would have all this," Clarence finished, gesturing to their thriving farm, their beautiful children, the life they had built together. "I didn't know what I was looking for until I found you, Clara. You healed something in me that I didn't even know was broken. And you taught me that my scars weren't something to hide," Clara replied, touching her cheek in a gesture that had become a habit over the years, no longer self-conscious, but simply acknowledgement of a part of herself. "You were right that first night. They show I'm a survivor." 15 years after that fateful day at the train station, Yarrington hosted a grand harvest festival that drew visitors from throughout the territory. Clara, now a respected businesswoman whose dressmaking skills were legendary in western Nevada, had been asked to judge the textile competition. As she moved among the displayed quilts and garments, she overheard a conversation between two young women she didn't recognize. "Who is that woman?" one asked, gesturing discreetly toward Clara. "The one with the scarred face." "That's Mrs. Davidson," the other replied. "She makes the most beautiful dresses you've ever seen. They say her husband fell in love with her because of her scars, not despite them, said they showed she was a survivor." "How romantic," sighed the first young woman. "Do you think she might consider taking on an apprentice?" "I've always wanted to learn from a true master." Clara smiled to herself and continued her judging, making a mental note to speak with the young woman later. That evening, as she recounted the conversation to Clarence as they prepared for bed, he laughed softly. "You've become a local legend, my love," he teased. "The scarred beauty whose dresses are sought after across the territory." Clara threw a pillow at him playfully. "Hardly a legend, but it is strange how things change. 20 years ago, I couldn't walk down a street without children pointing and adults averting their eyes. Now, I'm Mrs. Davidson, the dressmaker first and the woman with the burns second, if at all." Clarence drew her into his arms. "To me, you've always been just Clara, stubborn, talented, compassionate, and entirely too good for the likes of me." Clara kissed him deeply. "I think we've been exactly right for each other. Everything that happened, the fire, the letters, even Frank Wilson's drunken insults, it all led us here, to this life. And I wouldn't change any of it." As they grew older, Clara and Clarence watched their children mature into adults with their own dreams. Matthew took to farming with his father's passion, gradually assuming more responsibility for the day-to-day operations. The twins chose different paths, Sarah becoming a teacher in Yarrington's growing school, while Emily discovered a talent for medicine and went east to study nursing. "Do you think she'll come back?" Clara asked anxiously after they had put Emily on the eastbound train. "The world is so much bigger than Yarrington. She might find she prefers city life." Clarence squeezed her hand. "If she does, we'll visit. And if she doesn't, She'll always carry a piece of the home we made for her in her heart. In their 30th year of marriage, when Clara's hair had turned silver and Clarence's back had begun to stoop from decades of farm work, they received a letter from Boston. It was from a young woman named Helen, who explained that she was the daughter of one of Clara's childhood friends. "My mother often spoke of you," the letter read. "She told me how brave you were after the fire, how you refused to let it destroy your spirit even when others turned away. I have a daughter who was burned in an accident last year. The doctors have done what they can, but she will always bear the marks of what happened. She is only 8, and already I see her withdrawing from the world, hiding her face, flinching from strangers' stares. I thought perhaps, if it's not too much to ask, you might write to her. She needs to know that a scarred face does not mean a diminished life." Clara wept as she read the letter, then immediately sat down to reply. Her letter to young Rebecca was the first of many, a correspondence that continued for years as the girl grew into a young woman. When Rebecca turned 18, she made the journey west to visit the woman whose words had helped her find her courage. "She has your spirit," Clarence observed as they watched Rebecca helping Matthew's children gather eggs from the chicken coop, her scarred face animated as she laughed with the little ones who accepted her appearance without question. "You've given her a gift beyond measure." "The same gift you gave me," Clara replied softly. "The knowledge that scars can be worn with dignity, that they need not define or limit us." On their 40th anniversary, with their children, grandchildren, and half the town of Yerington gathered to celebrate, Clarence stood in the gazebo he had built so many years before and raised a glass to his wife. "40 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his 72 years, "I made the best decision of my life when I married this remarkable woman. Clara taught me that true beauty lies in courage, in resilience, in the ability to face whatever life brings with grace and an open heart." He turned to face her directly, his eyes as full of love as they had been on their wedding day. "The scars that made others turn away were what showed me who you truly were, a survivor, stronger than any hardship, braver than any fear. I have been blessed beyond measure to walk through life beside you." Clara rose to stand beside him, her scarred face wreathed in smiles as she faced their gathered loved ones. "We have been blessed indeed," she said. "With family, with friends, with a community that learned to see beyond the surface to the heart beneath. And most of all," she added, turning to Clarence, "with a love that saw value in imperfection, beauty in what others considered damaged. You didn't just accept my scars. My darling, you taught me to wear them as badges of honor." As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the farm, Clara and Clarence slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the top of the small rise behind their property. From there, they could see the lights of Yerington in the distance, the sprawling expanse of the farm they had built together, and the gathering of people below who represented the fruits of their shared life. "Did you ever imagine, that day at the train station, that we would have all this?" Clara asked, leaning against Clarence's side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Not in my wildest dreams, but then, I couldn't have imagined you either, how completely you would transform my life." "We transformed each other," Clara corrected gently. "You were just as much a healing for me as I was for you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as their oldest grandson, Matthew's boy Joseph, led the younger children in a game of tag around the yard. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and challenges. The work of a farm never truly ended. And even though they had gradually passed most responsibilities to the younger generation, they remained involved in daily life. But for now, in this moment, they were simply Clara and Clarence, Two people who had found in each other the courage to see past appearances to the true heart beneath. A mail-order bride with scars that told the story of her survival, and the cowboy who had seen those scars not as flaws but as testament to her strength. Together, they had built a life rich with love, purpose, and the quiet dignity of facing each day with open hearts and steadfast spirits. "I love you, Clara Davidson," Clarence murmured against her silver hair. "Scars and all, yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Clara turned in his embrace, lifting her face to his, the face he had come to love so deeply that he sometimes forgot which side bore the marks of fire and which did not. "And I love you, Clarence Davidson," she replied, "for seeing in me what I could not yet see in myself, and for giving me a life beyond my most hopeful dreams." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above them, they made their way back down the hill toward the light and laughter of their gathered family. Two survivors walking hand in hand into the future they had created together, scarred perhaps, but stronger for it, and beautifully, perfectly whole.